I've worked in this sector around trauma for, I will confess, nearly 40 years, when people didn't talk about trauma, when people just talked about labelling and difficult people and sent them to prison or hospital. And this sort of, it's unbelievable that this sort of conference is happening. So well done, Nikki. Thank you for having me. Well done, all of you. But also, it's also about praising, I think, the clients that we work with that have undergone, experienced, as Jeannie was referring to just then, some of the most unimaginable life events that you can think of, or probably you don't want to think about if you don't work frontline. And to survive, to even stay alive, they need our praise for doing that. And I think they often come across or work with or come into systems where they don't get that. So it's praising them for just keeping going somehow. Well, thank you. I've also got the worst slot of the day, I think. Sorry, Nikki. I don't know if you put me... you all want your lunch, and you all think you're going to get it at 12:15. I will stick to my half an hour probably, but it might mean you're a little bit late for lunch. So I'm presenting to a room full of rumbling tummies, and I'm taking it back to a bit of theory, which is always a little bit hard as well. So if you want to know who I am, it's in the thing. I'm not going to bother to introduce myself anymore. I will just reiterate this little bit, that this is... some of the stuff I'm going to talk about is tough. I also don't know you as an audience, so there's going to be people sitting there that are going, we know this, we've known this for a long time, she's just repeating stuff we know. I apologise if you know this already. It's always good to rehearse and go over things a bit. And for some of you, this might be completely new. You might work in a department where you don't come across this sort of conversation or this sort of language. So I just want you to take care of yourselves, because as Nikki said at the beginning of the day, some of this stuff can be really difficult when we sit and we look at a slide and we go, oh, that's me, and you didn't realise, okay? I'm going to take us back initially to the ACE study, which I imagine most of you in this room have heard about. It's a fairly old piece of research. For those of us that have worked in any sectors where we were face-to-face with people that experienced trauma, this was no surprise. And I can remember when it came out thinking a bit like, oh, you know, no shit, Sherlock. Yeah, people that have had horrible childhoods are going to end up maybe struggling a bit in adulthood. But what it did do was it ignited an interest in different statutory sector organisations that possibly weren't particularly interested in trauma before. I think it's fair to say that. And what happened is that it became part of a conversation. I was texting with a friend last night, and she told her daughter that I was at a conference, and her daughter said, that's what's she doing? And she told her, and she said, we're learning, I know what ACEs are. They're adverse child experiences. We're learning about those in school. That's amazing. Well done, school. I'm not going to read all the slides, you can read them yourselves, but it's a study. What I would stress about the ACEs study is that it's a tool used to determine public health need in an area. It is not an assessment, it's not something that should be talked through with people, it's a research tool. What it gave us, of course, was all this amazing data. Some of the data on here is from the Wales study, who also looked at mental health. But it's got that awful triangle, which suggests that it's all a bit gloom and doom if you've experienced adverse child experiences. And I think I have heard across, because we work nationally, across the country, that some of this is used to get people out of services rather than in services, or it becomes predictive of how they might respond in services. There's no point in doing something with people that's had 9 or more ACEs because it's never going to change. We've added, since this study first came out in 1998, we've opened it up and thought about all the other factors that might also contribute to the child's trauma if they're experiencing them. What it did was it started to enable us to have better conversations about a thing called developmental trauma. This is not a new term, again. It describes how individuals might be if they've had chronic trauma from early days, which is a little bit what I'm going to elaborate on in a minute. And it can be things like abandonment, neglect. I would like to say here, though, because I think it's really important, that sometimes the trauma that children experience is absolutely unintentional by parents who themselves were traumatized, whose parents they were traumatized. There's intergenerational trauma that goes on, and it's too easy to say when a child is being, excuse me, neglected or not looked after, or something is happening in that household, to do what is classic in our society. And I pick up the point you said about the misogyny, is that actually what we do is we blame mum. It's her fault. She's not doing something right. She should do something else. But it's not, sometimes it is not intentional. In the work that we do, in the programs that we run with people, it's about giving people the education to understand how they can be a better, they're not parent, I don't like the word parenting program personally, but it's about giving people information. And what happens alongside this, and I'm not going to talk about this today, is that you get this disrupted attachment. So a child that is living with trauma fails to make what is a nice, safe, healthy attachment with an adult. And that's going to affect when you try and work with that adult. When that child grows up to an adult, if they haven't had a secure attachment, that's going to make them a bit tricksy sometimes to work with. It's not a new term. If you haven't read any of Bessel van der Kolk's work, Body Keeps a Score, I recommend you rush out to a bookshop and get it. Bessel van der Kolk and colleagues at the Harvard Center for Child Development. Again, you can just go online, sign up to that. Amazing resources if you're interested in this stuff at a clinical or support level. They've been talking about it a long time. You will see that it affects every area of somebody's life. It affects how your sensory development, your attachment, how you manage your behaviors, how you identify. All of these things are impacted by the trauma that you experience as a child. And I'm going to explain a bit more about how that happens. You're probably all familiar with this diagram. It's like the first 2 years that are absolutely critical. And that's when we're learning things, and it's really important that things go right in those first couple of years. Now, for a lot of the families that we're working with, things don't go right in those first couple of years. And so what happens is there is some disruption in the way that that young person may develop. Again, I just want to put this in there again. This might be a slide that some of you and lots of you have seen before. It is quite normal for our body to, and it needs to, sometimes respond to stressful situations. And I'm going to talk through in a bit more detail the process of that from a neuroscience point of view. But for most of us, when the immediacy of the event that's frightening is over, our central nervous system calms down and we go back to a rest position. So we all think things, you step out on the pavement and a car's coming and you jump back and you can just feel it in your body, can't you, flooding through you. And then, take a few deep breaths, have a little cry maybe because you nearly got killed, and then everything's okay again. But what happens also, so we've got all this flight or fight, this child never gets back to that rest place because this is floating around in their brain the whole time, they're scared the whole time, they're anxious the whole time, is that recent research is telling us a lot more about epigenetics. I'm not an epigeneticist, and I only know the very basics of it, but it is fascinating. What's fascinating about it is that, did you all know, for example, that you were an egg in your mother's womb when she was in your granny's womb? I mean, that's just mind-blowing, isn't it? And weird at the same time. So what epigenetics tells us, that intergenerationally, markers get laid down that can affect us. It's hard to do these studies on humans because you need to see it over generations, and what we hope is that humans don't die quickly. So we do these studies on rats, which apparently have a very similar central nervous system to humans. And what they do is that they give these rats, it's horrible stuff. They give these rats a little electric prod and the smell of something. And then the next generation, the little prods smell of something because they breed quite quickly, rats, in case you didn't know that. I'm sure you do. And what happens is it comes to a point, a few generations down, where you just give the smell to the rat and the rat responds with a fear response. Okay? They've done some work on Holocaust survivors around this generationally. around eating and around fear. So what's the epigenetic effect if you were starved in a concentration camp? And then how does that affect your grandchildren later down the road? And as there is some impact. So this is all going on that we can't see. All right. However, just hold on to the fact that positive marks can also leave something. I'm going to talk to you just very quickly about the brain. And if you take nothing else away today, this is something that you can pass on to friends, colleagues, and people you work with. The brain that's the brain. And we've got this thing at the front called the prefrontal cortex. I'm going to refer to that as the wedding planner, okay? Now, I'm doing that because my daughter's getting married next year at last. And so I'm experiencing a bit of wedding planning from her. All right, so the prefrontal cortex, which goes on developing until we're in late adolescence, bit beyond, is a really important part of the brain. It's really important because it's what's called the executive functioning part of the brain. This is the part of the brain that just sorts things out for us. It's the part of the brain that means that children arrive at school or their first lesson with their little bag packed and they've remembered to bring a pencil. It's the one that lets them stand in line and not do anything else. It's the little bit of their brain that enables them to think through solutions, see there are consequences, and take different actions. And it's the part of the brain that enables them to manage their emotions and interact with others. It's really, really important. Starts developing quite early on, goes on to develop throughout somebody's life. Some of us have got better executive functioning than others. There we are, there's your wedding planner. The trouble is we're going to bring the bridesmaids in. Oh no, exactly. So we've got bridesmaid 1 and bridesmaid 2, which the amygdala I refer to as bridesmaid 1, and the hypothalamus is bridesmaid 2. Bridesmaid 1 sees danger and something going wrong everywhere. Bridesmaid 1 is looking for what's not going to happen and who's not going to turn up and who's going to get too drunk on the hen night to turn up on the wedding day, and is the dress going to be there, and what time's the hairdresser coming, and maybe the hairdresser's not going to get there on time. Oh my God, there's the makeup to do yet. So the bridesmaid 1, who's feeling solely responsible for the success of this event, is going slightly overdrive. Bridesmaid 2 is a bit calmer. Bridesmaid 2 actions what bridesmaid 1 is worried about. So bridesmaid 2 goes off and makes sure that the hairdresser's booked and makes sure that the guests are arriving and sort of does things for them. That's because the amygdala senses danger, whether it's real or perceived. And I think it's really important to remember that we can never tell if something is frightening somebody because we don't know what that might be and they might not know themselves. So triggers can be absolutely anything. And the hypothalamus is the one in this sympathetic nervous system. This is all unconscious, remember, absolutely unconscious. Will send off all the stuff that's needed to help with this. So they'll make sure that the cortisol starts going around, the adrenaline starts going around, and everything starts going around. Sorry. If you have a child that grows up with trauma, what you have is an adult that is permanently in one of these states. And what's really hard to get our heads around is that, thank you very much, what's really hard to get our heads around is that that feels normal to them. So this hyperarousal state is their normal position, and the big challenge is, when we're using a trauma-informed approach to people, is that that is their safe position. So when we're working with people who've experienced trauma and we're trying to make them safe, some of what we're doing is asking them to step out of what they feel is their safe place into something completely unknown. And I think that's where, for me, the challenge of the work sits. That the time spent making someone safe, working to keep someone safe that's experienced trauma, is the most valuable time you can spend with somebody, remembering that we're asking them to come into a space they don't even recognize. So we always talk about flight or fight. I'm not going to go through reading all these, but these are the sort of behaviors and the sort of things that you might see, that you can see that if you're not using a trauma-informed model, if you're not using a trauma-informed approach with people, very easily gets people labels around, and language is so important in this work, gets people's language of, you know, they're difficult, they're awkward, they don't want to take part, they don't want to engage, they're, you know, all of those sorts of things. They can also be a bit talky-backy to us. That's shocking, isn't it? We're out to help them. We don't expect them to challenge us and tell us they don't like what we're suggesting to them, for goodness sake. But they might. Also with the flight, again, this is, I mean, I think, again, sometimes for agencies, this is a bit harder to understand. Well, I love the one about micromanaging people, because when you work with people that have experienced trauma, sometimes they'll try and micromanage you, because actually it's part of their coping strategy, it's part of their safe place. You can have anxiety and panic attacks, and you can have zoning out. I think this one is often, we don't maybe spend enough time on this one. And I think for people, particularly who've had childhood trauma and then have had adult trauma as domestic abuse or sexual violence, this is a place that they may find themselves in, because it is shutting out, it's in denial, it's some distortion sometimes. This is why sometimes people get accused of being really bad witnesses, is because their inability to distinguish fact from fiction is based on their psychology, it's based on their flight or fight, it's based on the chemicals that went around in their body and the way that they're surviving it. It's not about them trying to make things up. And they can get confused. They often just get diagnosed with depression. Again, this one, fawning. This is the one where people go, why didn't she just leave? Or why didn't they just do something? You become a people pleaser if you've lived with trauma for a long time. And it's much easier, again, seeing it from the perspective of the abuser, so that what you're doing is you're placating all the time and you're keeping somebody happy all the time. They'll do that to you as well. And these are, I think, sometimes when I've worked therapeutically with people who are in this place, this is really hard, because you'll be in therapy or you'll be trying to support someone and you'll say, maybe we could try this. And they'll go, yeah, fine. I'll do that. Yeah. But maybe you would like to, no, I'll do that. That's fine. So what you do is again, by inviting them to take decisions for themselves, you're having to put them into a place that's not safe for them. And then there's freeze. Okay. So I just want to say that all of those things are going on all the time for somebody when we're working with them. And a lot of these behaviours that people have adapted to survive what they're going through are really going to challenge us. You probably know all of this too, about impacts on emotions. So I'm just mindful of I'm trying to look at the time. So all of you that were speaking so eloquently earlier about the clients that you're working with, you know, what I always say to clients is that, you know, whatever you did, whatever you do, that's your way of surviving. Like I said at the beginning, surviving the horror that you've been through, and, you know, well done. But it's not going to keep you safe in the future. It's not going to be manageable for you in the future if you continue to use those coping strategies. So the challenge, I think, is working out how we can work with somebody to take them in. Is that still working? Or is it still working? Take them into a space where they can feel safe in the complete unknown and be with them. Short-termism isn't a solution to this. You know, 6 weeks isn't, you know, whatever you get sometimes under services is not the solution to this. And again, we've had some conversations earlier about the trauma showing up in the body. I think this is interesting because I think it's about a lot of what, if you talk to people that have been through lots of trauma, that they do. And some people that have been through trauma, you would never know they've been through trauma, because what they do is they buy into this so well that actually it's like a mask, and they become successful outwardly. So what you see is very successful people sometimes who have just got like this shadow somewhere of all this stuff that bottles under. And if everything goes along okay, that's fine. But what I've experienced often is that a couple of other things go wrong. You know, they lose their job, or their partner leaves them, or their child's ill, and a couple of things start to go wrong, and the infrastructure they've built to cope with this implodes. I just think this is, we should apply a trauma lens to everybody, including ourselves, really. I talk a little bit about multiple disadvantage. I'm not going to get that. These are the clients we're talking about. You've talked, I mean, I'm sure you know all this stuff. about what a trauma-informed practice is. What I would say in our experience in the work that I do, and there was a big push at the beginning when people started talking about trauma-informed work to train the staff and get frontline staff up to speed and do all of that. Honestly, I'll do myself out of work here. You have to deal with it at a systems place first. This has to be embedded into the structure of the organisation so that the people that are delivering the work below will be supported as you implement it. If you don't do that, all you do, I think, is actually make your frontline staff vulnerable. You make them vulnerable because you ask them to practice in a way that is relational. You ask them to be close to the people they're working with, not giving out secrets or sharing anything, but people that have been through trauma spot someone that hasn't got authenticity 3 miles away. So when you ask your staff to be authentic, which is what they want to be, they've come into these professions because they really want to help people, and you don't support your staff with policies, procedures, supervision, reflective practice, nice offices, somewhere to park the car, then actually what you do is you put them, I think, at risk. That's a bit of a brave statement, but I'll say it for today. It has to start with your policies, your procedures, with your senior management, with a vision statement from your CEO or whoever, or your board. It has to start there, and those people have to understand that. So I'm not going to go through the rest of it. I just reinforce, I think so you know all that stuff. I think the principle, and I know you want lunch. I think the principles are the same. There's a little bit of different terminology sometimes around it, but fundamentally these are the 6 core principles. For me as a clinician, I think my time is best spent, although I don't work actively clinically now, but when I did work clinically, I think my time was spent doing safety and trustworthiness. The safety bit I've already mentioned. The trustworthiness, this one makes me smile sometimes. No, I'm not going to be... it's very easy once you've trained as a professional to think that you have like Harry Potter's invisibility cloak. You have a cloak that says, trust me. It's that trust me, I'm a doctor thing. It's trust me, I'm a social worker. Trust me, I'm a professional. Why? Really, really why? Our job as professionals, these people that we're working with have huge issues around trust. They have huge issues around trust because the people they were meant to trust most in their life have let them down. So they don't know what trust is, and I don't mean that in a disparatory way about the people we work with. They've just never had any experience of it. So our job is to evidence being trustworthy, and we have to work really, really hard at that. And I don't think, I just think that there's if you spend, and you can do everything you normally do with people. You turn up for appointments and you take them to clinics and you do everything. But you have to be constantly mindful of demonstrating your trustworthiness and your agency's trustworthiness. And that's why the short-termism doesn't work. How many of us have seen people who have had, 6 different social workers, kids that have had 10 different foster placements, why on earth are they going to engage with us in the future? And it's our job to make them engage, actually. It's also not their job to engage with us. That's our job. That's the primary part of our job. But why would they? If you've been through the system and the system's let you down in that way, that nice lad selling ketamine down the road's going to be all right, though, because they're going to offer me friendship group, they're going to offer me some money, they're going to get me out of my head so that I don't have to deal with what I feel inside and the pain I feel. And those social workers aren't going to do any of that. They're just going to put me in another foster home and then move me on 2 weeks later. What choice would you make? And all the other bits that go with it. Sorry. The choice is really important. Again, people that we're working with that have had childhood trauma have never had a choice, or if they have had a choice, it's between a rock and a hard place permanently, and whatever choice they've got has got pretty negative consequences. We have to work really hard at demonstrating what a choice might be, and not trust sometimes that when they say they're making a choice, they really are. Because there's a world of difference between making an informed choice and just a choice. So we have to work really hard and explain it. I think it's fine to use this language with people and talk to them in that way. The cultural responsiveness is really, really important in terms of we are really bad at that, I think. I mean, look around the nice white audience here today. We don't make the effort that's needed to do this. And I think that, I think our job is to be allies to our partners that work in specialist sectors, and we have to work proactively at that. It doesn't just happen. I hope that you agree with that. But I've just said, but it doesn't just happen. It's something that we have to consciously go out and work at. If you do those other things, if you do those other things, you'll empower someone. All right, there's no trick to empowerment. You just will. So you do all of those things in that way, but you can use all the stuff that you do normally about it. I hope we don't ever have any more studies about what helps children, because we know that youth workers and youth centres and community arts and community activities did. So that's why we shut down all the youth services and got rid of all the youth workers. Oh, and then we can spend a lot of money on a report finding out what helps children. There is no new evidence research needed to know what keeps children out of trouble and what helps children. Good community structure, support with a good trusting adult if they're not getting that within their own family, participation in sports or community arts or those things helps children undo some of that conditioning and gives children an opportunity to experience safety in their heads, safety away from that flight or fight place. So I'm really, really keen that one of the things that any frontline worker can do is teach kids about their own emotional regulation. Teach them flight or fight, they get it. Teach them about the amygdala, bridesmaid 1, bridesmaid 2. Teach them all that stuff and give them grounding techniques and ways that they can manage it. The other thing though, and all of this stuff there you can read, but also the other really important thing is to be regulated ourselves when we're working with children and young people, because if we flip, they're going to too, and they will know. They ain't daft. So one of the really important jobs we have when we're working with children is to make sure that ourselves and our staff group are regulated. I am a huge believer in supporting parents to support their children. I think we can put children into all sorts of agencies and all sorts of groups, and we can do stuff with kids at school, which is brilliant. But the reality is that a child will spend more time with their parents than they will anybody else. So what we really have to do is stop silo working and work with the parents and the children. It's interesting because funding still only goes to children's work, or funding goes to adult work, and actually I don't understand why we separate those two things out. What we know, this was based on some research that was done. I was really lucky enough to go to Canada and America in 2016 and they're a bit further ahead with trauma-informed working than we are, and meet some staff at Spokane University that had done lots of work around the things that they had identified that helped parents support their children. And they were these things: making sure that parents were connected to people in their community, helping parents set and move towards goals had a positive effect on the children, actually teaching them self-care. What they discovered was that a large majority of the parents they worked with had no idea about developmental milestones in children or what was appropriate at children's age. It's hardly a surprise. If you've come up in a family where there's intergenerational trauma, you probably had expectations put on you at an age that you weren't ready to do them. So knowing at what age a child can be expected to use a knife and fork and a spoon and be potty trained, it doesn't come out of the ether, does it? We don't wake up one day and go, oh yeah, because you're not born with a manual. I thought when I had my daughter, they'd give me a little book that said it was really easy, and they didn't. So, but I was lucky I had some family support. A lot of the people that we're working with have never had that. So how are they meant to know these things? Teaching and helping parents take an emotional break is really important, and helping people establish a routine. You remember the executive functioning part of the brain that I talked about earlier on? If you've grown up with intergenerational trauma, you are parenting a child whose executive functioning isn't developing particularly well because you haven't got the executive functioning because yours didn't develop particularly well. And one of the ways, if you look at some of the work at Harvard and things, one of the ways that you repair the executive functioning part of the brain is to do routine things. So there are activities that you can put in place, but helping people develop a routine is really good. And again, having support. This is for the kids, being resilient as parents. Teach them about attachment. We use a little Winnie the Pooh thing about attachment with our parents, and we talk to them about, how I haven't got time. Come and ask me if you want to know about Winnie the Pooh. Teach them the development and the emotional competencies and being socially connected. Through adults, through a trauma lens, there's all sorts of things. There's trauma stabilization. which we've been doing a long time, really, but not called it that in such a concrete way. Trauma-focused cognitive behaviour therapy. These are all nice National Institute for Clinical Care and Excellence guidelines about what is effective in working with trauma. EMDR. I think for me the most important thing is about not pathologizing. I know that sometimes people need labels and sometimes people need a diagnosis to get right support and treatment they need. But I have in my career of nearly 40 years working in the mental health services seen far, far, far too many people given a diagnostic label that sticks with them for the rest of their life, where actually the label just should have said trauma. This person's experienced trauma. Recognizing what people's coping strategies are and don't judge them, which I've talked about quite a lot, and none of you are anyway, but it's that, you know, people do weird and wonderful things to survive trauma. I'm always a bit like, ooh, that's a new one. But on the whole, they will fall into categories that society don't like, basically. So we need to see them as coping strategies. Obviously, we don't judge. And do some somatic body work with people is becoming increasingly, I think, one of the things that people are moving forward. There's also been, I just wanted to add at the end, benevolent childhood experiences, because there is some research to say that there are some other things that are a counterpoint to the ACEs, and you can Google Narian and look at the tools that they've done. So it's really interesting just to, and then Bethel et al. Also did a similar study, and it's just really heartful, because I think that sometimes people who get told, oh, you've got 9 ACEs, and then they read a bit about ACEs or they know about it, think that that means it's just going to be a disaster for them, and it doesn't have to be, and it's not. And I do love this quote from Albert Einstein. I look like I've modelled my hair on him. I just realised that. I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious. And being curious is the most important thing in trauma-informed work. Stay curious as staff, stay curious as commissioners and people that are buying in services. And I think the trick is to enable the people we work with to start to be curious themselves. And when they start to be curious about the way their lives are, then I think that's the beginning of them being able to make huge differences. That's me. Thank you very much.